Hi everyone. In this lecture we're going to talk about selected material from chapter 6 of your text focused on long-term memory and structure. So first, we can think about long-term memory as being more of an archive of information from past events and knowledge that we've learned throughout our lives. So this works very closely with working memory, as we know. For example, if we want to remember something that's in our long-term memory, we have to bring it into working memory in order to actually be able to use that information. Now, storage in long-term memory stretches from a few moments ago to as far back as you can remember. And we can say that more recent memories tend to be more detailed than older memories. Now, if we look at it along a timeline here, anything after 30 seconds ago would be considered to be long-term memory. Okay, anything more recent than 30 seconds would be a short-term memory. So, for example, you just sat down in class, but I mean, walking back, a little bit further, I was walking to class 5 minutes ago, that would be long-term memory. Now here we're taking a look at the distinction between short-term and long-term memory using a serial position curve. And this was done by Murdoch in 1962. And in this task, they had participants read a stimulus list and then write down all the words that they could remember. And what they found was two separate effects here. So first they found that memory was better for stimuli that was presented in the beginning. This is called the primacy effect. So you see this here. So these are words that were early on in the list. So this is serial position. So words that were in the first through third, fourth position or so were remembered better or recalled better. And this is likely due to the fact that these words or stimuli were able to undergo rehearsing and were more likely to enter long-term memory. The other effect they found was that stimuli was remembered if it was presented later on or at the end of the list. And this is called the recency effect. And this is really thought to be due to the fact that these stimuli would still be in short-term memory. So that would be right here. So these last items, positions 13 through 15 would be recalled more likely. Now, something that can really affect this is if we insert some sort of delay. So if we insert, like, for example, a 30-second delay here, we see that the recency effect is completely eliminated. And that is, again, due to the fact that these items are being more recalled because they are still in short-term memory. But if we insert 30 seconds into recall here, so if we insert that delay, then these items are no longer in short-term memory. So recall of these then is going to flatten out here. So then we're just going to have a primacy effect, but no recency effect.
So we know that long-term memory uses predominantly semantic encoding, but also we know that short-term memory does use a little bit of semantic encoding as well. And that's what this study here by Wickens in 76 was looking at. So in this particular study, they would divide participants into two groups, so the fruits group and professions followed by fruits, for example. And they would show participants three words. So in trial 1 here for the fruits group, we have banana, peach, and apple. And so they would show participants this, and then the participants would have to count backward from 15 and then recall the three words. And what they found was that with each trial, performance got a bit worse. And also keep in mind, we are looking at short-term memory with this study because we're only using 15-second intervals between presentation and recall because, as we know, that particular time frame puts this in the short-term memory category. But what they did find was that for the professions followed by fruits group, this decline in performance or this proactive interference was reduced when on trial 4 the words changed in terms of meaning. Okay, so that gives us some evidence that we have some semantic encoding in short-term memory, not just in long-term memory. And here we're seeing data from that particular experiment. So this would be the fruits group, and what we see is we see proactive interference, which again is just a decrease in memory that occurs when previously learned information is affecting later learned information. And the fruits group, of course, is just doing worse as the trials go along because they're getting fruits in every trial. But the professions followed by fruits group has the initial PI effect, but then we see a release from proactive interference in trial 4 because unlike the first 3 trials where they're getting professions, on the 4th trial they're getting a group of fruits to recall. Now we can look at the neuropsychology of basically just locating memory in the brain. And what we find is that the hippocampus is responsible for your ability to encode new long-term memories. And we know that impairment or damage to the hippocampus can really affect the ability to encode new long-term memories. And we know this based off of case studies. We have evidence from patients such as HM. HM had surgery for epilepsy and had basically his whole hippocampus removed. And Clive Wearing had encephalitis, which caused damage to his medial temporal lobe, which includes the amygdala and the hippocampus. And we also have KF, who had a motorbike accident and suffered damage to his parietal lobe. Now, what we find from these three patients is something we call a double dissociation for short-term memory and long-term memory. So we find that with HM and Clive Wearing, both of which suffered damage to their hippocampus, they have impaired long-term memory, but their short-term memory is okay. Whereas KF has the opposite problem. He has impaired short-term memory, but his long-term memory is okay. So here, again, we have this double dissociation, which is giving evidence for the role of the hippocampus in long-term memory, and also giving us, even more importantly, evidence that short-term memory and long-term memory are really working in different areas of the brain. Now we move on to types of long-term memory. We say there's two basic types of long-term memory. We have episodic memory, which is memory for personal events like past birthdays, weddings, things like that. And then we have semantic memory, which is basic facts and knowledge. Now, episodic memory involves what we call mental time travel. So if I were to tell you to relive your 16th birthday, for example, that's been a while ago, so you'd kind of have to go back in time and relive that event to tell me about that birthday, whether or not you got a car or whether or not you had a party or if anything had all happened special that day, you'd have to kind of go back in time and relive that event to tell me about it. But we have no guarantee that there is going to be full accuracy with episodic memory, and we know that it can be quite flawed. Semantic memory doesn't involve mental time travel. Again, remember, this is memory for facts. For example, just general knowledge things. So who's on the $1 bill? If you can tell me who's on the $1 bill, well, that's just semantic memory. Now, if you tell me when you learned who was on the $1 bill, now that would be more episodic memory. But just basic knowledge for general facts, like whose face is on the $1 bill, that would be a semantic memory. Now, we also have evidence that episodic memory and semantic memory show a double dissociation in the brain as well. For example, if we look at patient KC, KC was also in a motorcycle accident and suffered severe damage to his hippocampus and the surrounding structures. And KC has no episodic memory whatsoever and can't relive any events from his past. He does have semantic memories, so basic factual knowledge memories he has, but he doesn't know how he knows these things. He has no memory of experiencing past events or anything like that. But in contrast, we have a case with an Italian woman who has impaired semantic memory, but her episodic memory for past events is preserved. So in this case, then, we have another double dissociation. We have with KC, his semantic memory is okay, but he has poor episodic memory, and our Italian woman has the exact opposite issue. She has poor semantic memory or factual knowledge memory, but she knows about past personal events in her life, so her episodic memory is okay. So again, here we have this double dissociation or evidence that's supporting that semantic memory and episodic memory happen in different areas of the brain. Some evidence we have from brain imaging experiments that are retrieving episodic and semantic memories. We have evidence here, again, that's supporting that just from brain imaging studies, that different types of memory activate different areas of the brain. And we saw that some supportive evidence in that double dissociation we talked about on the last slide. But we also have this from brain imaging studies as well. When someone is recalling a past personal event or activating episodic memory, we see activation in certain areas of the brain, whereas with semantic memory or more factual knowledge memories, we see activation in different areas of the brain. So again, supporting that these two types of memory are happening or are being activated in different areas of the brain. Now, what we know is that over time, we definitely have interactions between episodic and semantic memories, but we do know that over time, our episodic memory of an event can be lost, leaving just the semantic portion of the memory. So we may not actually remember when, where, how we learned something. We don't have the episodic component of that. We can't go back in time and relive when we learned that, but we have the semantic portion of it. So, for example, I gave you the example of a $1 bill. Who was on the $1 bill? I know who's on the $1 bill, but I can't tell you when I learned that. I don't know if I learned it when I was a very young child in grade school or if my parents told me when I was a young child. I really don't know when I learned that, but I know at some point I did because I have the semantic knowledge of that. I just can't go back and relive when I learned it because I've lost that episodic component. Now, what we do know, though, is that semantic knowledge can be enhanced if it's associated with episodic memory. So if we can actually go back and relive when we acquired knowledge, it will enhance our ability to recall semantic information. Some examples we have are our autobiographical memory. So this is where we have memory of specific experiences in our personal lives, and these include both semantic and episodic memories. Personal semantic memories. So semantic memories that have personal significance. So this could be, for example, when you got married, the date in which you got married, or the date when you had your first child, or the date when you graduated from college. Just the date in and of itself, not the actual event, going back and to relive the event, but the actual date. The semantic knowledge of that memory could be of personal significance to you. So we have this semantic memory for personal events. But these things can influence, obviously, what we experience episodically by determining what we attend to. So based off of our past experience, that can really determine what we attend to in the present and how, in turn, we're going to encode memory. Now, if we look at just the effect of time on memory, typical research findings are that forgetting increases with longer intervals from original encoding, which makes sense. So the more time that passes between when you originally encoded information, the more forgetting we're going to see. And we can see this from procedures like one called the Remember No procedure. So this is where we're asking participants if they remember a stimulus, if it's familiar, and the circumstance under which they encountered it. So do they know the stimulus and do they know what the circumstance or environment was when they encountered it? Or if they know the stimulus is familiar but they don't remember experiencing it earlier, or if they just don't remember a stimulus at all. We can ask them questions like this to see what section their memory really falls under. And we also see an effect of semantization of remote memories. So this again is kind of where we're losing the episodic details of a memory for long ago events. So we're losing the ability to go back and relive when we got that information, when we actually experienced the acquisition of that information. We just have the information itself. Just to show you an example of this kind of memory decay over time. This is just for some results of a study that was looking at memory for 40 to 50 years ago in participants versus 10 years ago. And what you see here is, in the green bars here, we have the participants actually being able to exhibit some episodic qualities to their memory. So they actually remember things versus the blue bars are telling us that they know something. So they don't really remember it. They can't go back and relive it, but they know it's true. Versus these red bars here where they just don't know. They don't remember a stimulus. They can't recall when they encountered it. It's not familiar to them. They're just not sure. They don't know. And what we see is a difference in 10 years or less in terms of memory versus memories that occurred 40 to 50 years ago. And what we see a big difference in is the remembering and the just don't know sections. The know sections aren't changing that much. So the semantic memories really aren't changing so much. But what we see is changing is a loss of episodic memory as a function of just years between encoding and recall, and an increase in just not knowing much of anything about an event. Now here in this diagram, we can look at the branches of long-term memory. So far we've been talking about explicit memory or conscious memory, and those two branches are episodic and semantic. But there's also another branch of long-term memory, which is implicit or non-conscious memory. And this includes procedural, priming, and classical conditioning. So here we'll take a look at our implicit or non-declarative memory. So again, this is memory that's occurring that's we're really not conscious of. So things that we're encoding, things that we're using from memory, or that is coming from memory that's affecting our current behavior. These are things that, again, are unconscious or non-declarative. An example of this would be procedural or skill memory. So, for example, riding a bike. This would be a procedure. Now, you may not remember or be able to describe all of the different steps in which to ride a bike, but your body knows how to do it. You know how to do the procedure of riding a bike. It's a skill memory. And this is something that, again, is more unconscious. It's not a declarative, really, a declarative memory. Also priming. So previous experience changes a response without conscious awareness. So you previously experienced something and it changes your current response even though you're not really aware that it's happening. And lastly, classical conditioning. This occurs when we pair a neutral stimulus, so something that you don't respond to or have any behavioral change in the presence of. We pair that with a reflexive response. We pair those two together, and over time, the neutral stimulus eventually becomes a conditioned one, and we see a participant reacting to the conditioned stimulus in such a way that they didn't before. And again, this is something that the participant isn't conscious of. It's just something that's occurring. And I'll give you a video example of classical conditioning on your module as well, just so you can take a look at that so you understand really what's going on with that. And these are all things that are in contrast to the explicit memory we've been talking about in past slides, which is the episodic and semantic memories. So again, we have our procedural or skill memory. So this is, again, memory for actions like riding a bike. Now, a lot of times we have no memory of where or when we learned that. I really couldn't tell you when I learned to ride a bike. I know I did, and I know my dad helped me, but I don't really have a memory of when I learned it exactly or how I learned it exactly. I just know that I did. And performing procedures without being consciously aware of how to do them is kind of a hallmark of this type of memory. So it's just things that we go through step by step and we do in our daily life that we're not even really aware that we're doing them or how that we're doing them. We just are doing them. Now, what's interesting with this type of memory is that people who can't form new long-term memories can still learn skill memories, like HM. HM can learn how to do new things, but can't form new long-term memories. So this, again, tells us that this type of memory is going on in a different area of the brain. The last thing we'll take a look at is how implicit memory can affect our everyday experience. And this is a study done in '94 looking at propaganda. And what we find is that more participants rate statements as being more likely to be true if they've read or heard the statements before. Now, the important thing to note here is that it doesn't matter where they heard the statements before. It doesn't matter if it was a credible source or not. Just the fact that the source itself is familiar, the actual statement is familiar, is enough for them to rate it as being more true, just because they've seen it or heard it before. So, and again, this is something that participants aren't conscious of that they're doing. This is something that's going on in implicit memory. And this definitely has implications for advertisements, as you can imagine. So, as always, make sure to read through this chapter very carefully in your text, and I'll be back with you next week on our next chapter. Have a great week.